Hello and welcome to this edition of Statutory Update Income Tax. This is part 2 of July series. I am CA Nitta Ravikishore and I am joined by CA PV Raghavendra Kumar. In the next few minutes, we'll be dealing with the significant notifications, circulars, press releases, and case laws of the recent past. To start with, let me share the screen. We will be dealing with 2 circulars, 9 notifications, and 6 press releases which were released in the second fortnight of July 2020. Apart from these circulars, notifications, and press releases, we will be also dealing with some significant case laws of the recent past of the Supreme Court, various high courts, and also of tribunals. To start with, we'll be going to circulars. Circular number 14 of 2020 deals with a clarification in respect of section 194N. This section 194N deals with tax collection in respect of certain cash withdrawn from banks, etc. Where any cash is withdrawn from certain banks, post office, or any of these cooperative societies or from specified persons, what will happen is the TDS is to be deducted. There are certain exceptions to this section 194N which have been notified by certain notifications. So, Raghavendra Garu, you may proceed with this.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Originally, when the Finance Act 2019, when the section is inserted, TDS at the rate of 2% with respect to cash withdrawals in excess of 1 crore is only prescribed. But in the Finance Act 2020, it is a sea change. The cases where income tax returns are not filed, they are also taken into consideration, and this section is amended. Earlier in 194N, there is one proviso in class 5 is there. In that class 5, there is the class 5 reads like that. Any such other person or class of persons which the central government may by notification in the official gazette specify in consultation with the Reserve Bank of India. And afterwards, through 4 notifications, 2 people are notified. One is franchise agents, cash replenishment agencies, commission agents are traders operating under Agricultural Produce Market Committee, authorized dealers, franchise agents and sub-agents, and full-fledged money changers. They are also notified, for whom these sections are notified, or for whom this section is said to be not applicable. All these notifications, whatever are there, wherein these categories of persons are notified, all these are the year 2019. One is on 18/9/2019, the other one is on 29/2019, 15/10/2019. So certain doubts are raised because section 194N is amended, and in this 194N in the amended Finance Act 2020, there is 1/4 proviso which is inserted, wherein it reads that certain other persons or class of persons shall be notified by the central government in consultation with RBI. Now the question that is raised is, all these are, whatever are there, they are earlier notified under the first proviso, class 5. Now this 4th proviso has come into picture or is inserted, and what is the validity of the earlier notifications? So CBDT has given a given a circular that whatever are the earlier notifications that are made, wherein certain people, certain class of persons are notified that 194N provisions are not applicable, all these will come under the provision 4, and all the notifications earlier given will be as good as issued under provision 4 of 194N, sir.
Yeah, we'll proceed further. But before that, Raghavendra Garu, there is a echo from your side. Is any other program running on your computer, or anybody is watching this in the same network? Is it something like that?
No, sir, nobody is seeing it.
So I think I'm getting an echo from your side when you're speaking. I think your fan is also switched off. Is it right?
No, right. I am operating AC only.
Right. Okay, fine. Fine. We'll proceed further.
Do you want me to put off AC also?
No. You can keep the AC on. Let it be like that. We'll proceed further, and if we have any other disturbance, we will look into the matter at a later point of time. Now, coming to circular number 15 of 2020, which is dated 22nd July 2020. This is with regard to facilitation of notification of sovereign wealth funds under section 10 subsection 23 FE. Actually, this section 1023 FE enables exemption of certain incomes of certain specified persons. The incomes which have been referred to in that section are dividends, interest, or long-term capital gains which arise from the investment made by them in India, and if the investment is made in specified infrastructure businesses, and also this was later extended to certain subsectors also. Now the specified persons are the wholly owned subsidiary of Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and sovereign wealth funds and notified pension funds. So the specified persons are these notified sovereign wealth funds, notified pension funds, and also subsidiary of ADIA. The specified income being dividends, interest, or long-term capital gains from investment made by them in India. Now, to enable the notification of these sovereign wealth funds, these sovereign wealth funds have to apply to the prescribed authorities in the prescribed form. Those forms being form number 1 for application, and also they have to furnish periodical returns, and those periodical quarterly returns will have to be in form number 2. So this circular has or notification for that matter has notified these 2 forms. You can take it forward, sir.
That's the very purpose of this notification is sovereign wealth funds, to attract more and more funds, to attract more monies into infrastructure projects. The finance minister also in her speech has told that whatever is the interest, whatever is the long-term capital gains, and whatever is the dividend that accrues, that arises out of the investments that are made by these either the wholly owned subsidiaries of Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and the notified sovereign wealth funds and the notified pension funds. It is said to be exempt under 1023 FF. The purpose of this notification is to notify what are the sovereign wealth funds which qualify for 1023 FF. So this they have prescribed one form, and they are also directed, or they are supposed to file one audit report, and they are required to give the information about their quarterly investment, about the investment in the specified companies, in the infrastructures on a quarterly basis. This is all about this notifications.
Right. Moving forward to the next notification, This notification is dated 17th July 2020. It is in relation to section 1046. 1046 of the Income Tax Act 1961 authorizes the central government to notify certain authorities whose certain incomes, whose notified incomes will be exempt for tax, and also this exemption of the specified income received by those entities are subject to certain conditions. Now, in exercise of the power given under section 10 subsection 46, a RERA authority, the RERA authority of Bihar, that is Real Estate Regulatory Authority of Bihar, has been given the exemption. And this exemption, the only notified incomes will be exempted, and also the exemption comes with certain conditions, and also it will be for some specified assessment years. You can take it forward, sir.
Yes, sir. The few conditions are is they should not engage in any commercial activity. The nature of income that are specified to be exempt are amount received or any grants that are received from the government, the fee or penalty that is received from the builders, and any interest that is earned from because of making any fixed deposits or anything out of the grants and the fee and penalty, whatever they have received. If any interest is earned out of any deposit, that is also said to be exempt. They also need to file the return of income, and they also need to file one audit report along with the income tax return.
Yes,
this is all about the notification.
This exemption is applicable for assessment years 2021 to 24-25, and this exemption is in respect of Real Estate Regulatory Authority of Bihar.
Yes, sir.
Moving forward, notification dated 21st July 2020. This is also a similar notification. Now here, the authority whose specified income are exempt is the Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency. So the following incomes which are accruing to the Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency will be exempted, and the conditions subject to which the exemption is given is in point number 2 of the notification, and in point number 3 it was stated that the exemption will be applicable for assessment years 2021 to 23-24. So moving forward, the next notification is dated 21st July 2020, and this notification is given under section 138 of the Income Tax Act. Take it forward, sir.
Sir, this 138, if you take this section, no, the purpose of it is generally the income tax department generally will not share the information of the income tax SSCs, its SSCs. Either it may be income tax return or whatever particulars that are submitted to the department. Generally, it will not be shared. But in section 138, it is mentioned that if it is required in the interest of nation or in the interest of public, the information relating to the SSCs shall be shared to certain notified institutions or associations. Means association means notified agencies. So we take this notification, the information shall be shared with the Joint Secretary, Farms Welfare, Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farms Welfare, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India. The purpose of it is to identify the eligible beneficiaries under PM Kisan Yojana.
Right.
Under PM Kisan Yojana, sir, 6,000 rupees shall be paid irrespective of their acreage, hectare acreage. Earlier, 2 hectares is said to be the limit. Now, I think that is also not there. The condition for getting this 6,000 rupees per annum is they should not have paid any income tax in the earlier years. Number 2, it will not be given to professionals like chartered accountants, doctors, advocates. It will not be given to them. Likewise, one or two or three other categories are also specified, stating that these are eligible people who are not entitled for getting this 6,000 rupees under the scheme PM Kisan Yojana. The purpose
So
of sharing this information is to identify the farmers who are SSCs and who are paying income tax. But
so that
one small point here is the mapping is said to be done based on Aadhaar cards. But now there are so many people who have not linked this Aadhaar card with their PAN number. I think it is some area where they may find it difficult to exactly find out the ineligible farmers in this case.
yeah, the those persons who need to apply to the Yojana should give their Aadhaar numbers, and based upon the Aadhaar linkage, the information received from the income tax department will be matched to weed out if any ineligible SSCs are there. As you rightly pointed out, the PAN Aadhaar seeding is yet to be completed in some of the cases. Until then, the complete benefit of this sharing of information may not be derived by this PM Kisan Yojana, but it may be a beginning step towards that achievement of goal.
Correct, sir.
Moving forward, we have this notification dated 21st July 2020. This is also a notification under section 138 of the Income Tax Act, wherein certain other agencies have also been notified, with whom the income tax department will be sharing the information of SSCs. Take it forward, sir.
Yes, sir. The agencies that are notified under this are Cabinet Secretariat, Intelligence Bureau, Narcotics Control Bureau, National Investigation Agency. Generally, no, sir. In these cases, the information that is generally shared will be their PAN details, TAN details, bank account details, the written summary, the TDS summary, and any other information that is mutually agreed. But generally, whenever this information is shared, it is very much ensured that sharing of information is necessary for the purpose, and it will once again or twice, thrice ensured that this information is very much needed for carrying on the respective investigation or activity to share this information. That much we can understand.
Right. Moving forward, this notification dated 22nd July 2020 is a correction in already issued notification number 33/2020. There, this is also this notification 33/2020, which was given on 23rd June 2020, was also something related to section 10 subsection 46, wherein an authority in Greater Noida region was given exemption in respect of certain incomes subject to certain conditions. But in the original notification, the assessment years for which the exemption is available was mentioned, and now the years in which the exemption will be available is modified, and so this correction notification has been issued. Moving forward, we have this notification dated 24th July 2020, which gives the 17th Amendment rules of 2020. Now, why these amendment rules? Certain rules of the Income Tax Act, like rule number 31 AA, rule number 37 BC, rule number 37 CA, and rule number 37 I have been amended. Now, in these amended rules, certain sections are mentioned, like 206(1)(g). This section 206(c)(1)(g) refers to the TCS collection in respect of this LRS scheme. Also, this in respect of what you call this tour packages. And as far as section 206C 1H is concerned, it refers to the tax collection at source in respect of assessees who have made a transaction of 50 lakhs or more with any of the other person, and wherein the tax has to be collected. So you can, and in respect of this, what these rules states is that they have to furnish particulars of amount received or debited on which tax was not collected. Actually, in these subsections, there are certain items wherein the tax need not be collected. Certain instances where tax need not be collected are given. Now, for those instances also, they have to fill up a annexure in form number 27 EQ. That annexure in form number 27 EQ has been substituted. You can take it forward, sir.
Yes, sir. The purpose of this notification is to amend or to incorporate further details about cases where tax was not collected owing to certain provisions of 206C 1G 1H. If we take 206 1G, it prescribes that the authorized person has to collect TCS at the time of making a remittance from the buyer under liberalized remittance scheme. But in the first proviso, it is provided that he should not collect if the aggregate amount being remitted by the buyer is less than 7 lakh rupees in a financial year. That is proviso 1. There is another proviso number 4. What it says is that the authorized dealer shall not collect the amount in respect of which TCS is already collected by the seller. The reason for this proviso is there may be cases where the seller is under the obligation to collect TCS. In such a case, if the authorized dealer also collects TCS and if the seller also collects TCS, it becomes a case where tax is collected twice. So to avoid these cases, because if you take a seller who is in this outward tour package scheme, he is already under the obligation to collect a TCS, and any amounts that are remitted towards outward tour package, it should be routed or it should be remitted through authorized dealer. If the authorized dealer also collects TCS at that point of time, then it amounts to double collection of collection, which becomes a burden to the buyer. So through fourth proviso, that is eliminated. So sorry, that requirement is dispensed with. And there is another proviso 5. What it says is that these provisions of this subsection shall not apply if the buyer is liable to deduct tax at source under the provisions of the Act, and he should have deducted it. In such case also, there is no obligation for the authorized dealer to collect tax at source. So these are
I may interrupt you. The crux of the amendment is that though the TCS is not collected, however, the information will be passed on through the annexure to the government. Is it right?
Correct, sir. The form has become so dynamic and is able to capture all such cases wherein the authorized dealer or the seller of that outward tour package, they also need to give the details, the reasons why they have not collected TCS what is the reason and why they have not collected, and the cases where they have not collected. All these details should be incorporated in the statement of tax collection. And there is another 1H that is applicable to the seller of goods. There also, there is another proviso. What it says is that the buyer is liable to deduct tax at source under any provisions of the Act on the goods purchased by him. Then this provision shall not apply. So all these details also should be incorporated in the statement. So The purpose of this notification is to add these particulars into the statement of tax collection.
So all the LRS remittances will be known to the government. Previously, LRS remittances used to be the information with the banks only, but now
Correct.
the banks have to inform the LRS all the LRS informations, whether or not a tax has been collected or not, to the government.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, the next one with regard to 206C1H.
That I have discussed. That I have already discussed. There
Okay,
also
right.
there is. I said about in case of buyers who are under the obligation to deduct tax at the source.
Right,
For them
right,
also
yeah.
there is no requirement. Those details also shall be incorporated. Point number
Yes.
3. We need to go to point number 3.
Right, right. Point number 3 is with regard to amendment in rule number 37 BC, wherein the term dividend has been inserted after fees for technical services. This is with relation to relaxation of a higher rate of this tax in respect of these non-residents or foreign companies, wherein
Correct.
who are not having a PAN number. Now this term dividend was also included, I think, because now there is no dividend distribution tax and dividend is charged in the hands of the receivers of dividend. So the word dividend inclusion has been necessitated by that amendment, I suppose.
Yes, sir. Just one point to be added here is actually if the people are not, whoever is the payee, if he is unable to furnish his PAN details, TDS need to be deducted at the rate of 20%. Through Rule 37 BC, if the payee could furnish his name, email ID, contact number, address of the country, and a certificate from the respective country that he is the resident of that country, and the tax identification number, if these details are furnished, then there is no obligation or there is no requirement to deduct tax at source, to deduct tax at source at a higher amount of 20%. In this law, earlier dividends is not there. So now dividends is also added. So if somebody who is receiving dividends, but who is not having PAN number, if he is able to furnish the details, whatever is discussed earlier, if he is able to furnish those details, then there is no obligation to deduct tax at source at a higher rate.
Yeah, the next amended rule was 37 CA, which deals with the time limit within which the tax collected at source is to be deposited. There in that rule, previously subsection 1 and subsection 1C of section 206C was there. Now that subsection 1 and subsection 1C has been omitted, thereby that rule will read that the time limit within which the deposit for tax collected at source under section 206C, it will read like that. So for all those amounts which have been collected, the due date has been prescribed. Now
Yes,
moving forward to 37I, after subrule 2A is inserted. Now these 206C, 1F, 1G, 1H of 206C, where tax is being collected, it will be deemed that the amount paid will be given to the credit of the person from whom the tax has been collected. Means it is a type of advance tax.
Correct.
Is it so, sir?
Sir, earlier, no, the need for making this sub rule 2, the need for insertion is earlier sub rule 2. What it says is that generally the credit will be given if you take any 199 or any other sections. The credit of tax shall be given only when the income is offered to tax in the year in which the income is accessible to tax. Here, if we take this 2A, it is overriding that, notwithstanding anything contained in sub rule 2. What it says is that the TCS that is collected with respect to 1F, 1G, 1H of 206C, the credit shall be given to the person in the for the assessment year relevant to the previous year in which tax collection is made. If you see the earlier, if we see the 2, no, before this is 2A. If we see the 2, what it says is that TCS, the credit shall be given for the assessment year for which the income is accessible to tax. Here, credit shall be given in the year in which the tax collection is made. So that is the purpose of inserting that.
Basically, 1F is with relate to purchase of car, 1G is with relate to LRS, and also this what you call
LRS made for outdoor tour package.
Tour package, and 1H relate to this 50 lakh purchase of more than 50 lakhs.
Correct.
So
and the consideration should be received in that year.
In that year. So in respect of tax collected source, in respect of these subsections, the credit will be given in the year in which tax has been collected.
Yes, sir.
Without there being any link to the income to be offered.
Yes.
Yeah. So the annexure of 27 EQ has been amended, and moving forward, with this notification dated 28th July 2020, with relate to statement under 115 UB subsection 7, this rule, what it says is that 2 new forms 64C, statement of income distributed by an investment fund, to be provided to the unit holder under section 115 UB of the Income Tax Act 1961. It has been inserted, and this has to be furnished every year by 30th day of the June of the financial year following the previous year. And also the next form 64D, which deals with the statement of income paid or credited by investment fund, to be furnished under section 115 UB of the Income Tax Act 1961. Now this form is to be furnished within 15th day of June of the financial year following the previous year. So do you want to add something, sir, to this?
Sir, this investment funds, no, actually these are brought into statute through Finance Act 2015. This section 115 UB. The purpose of it is to pool the funds to make higher investments in small and medium enterprises, infrastructure, social projects, and to bring private equity into new ventures and startups. The beauty of this section is that though it is managed by an alternative investment fund, it will be treated as if whoever are the investors, whoever have invested it. Though the fund may be acting on behalf of all the investors, but the capital gains or whatever are required to be taxed, it will be taxed in the hands of the respective investors as if they have made it in their personal account.
So that is pass through.
Yes, just it is a pass through. Earlier, no, there is no dividend distribution tax also for these for these things. It will be treated as if the monies whatever are invested, the gains are distributed to them, and the tax rates and all the things will be applicable as if they have made in their individual account. The only thing to be noted is now the PAN details. If you see this 69D, the PAN details of the directors and whoever are the persons responsible in this, they are also incorporated in this 64D. That is number one. Earlier, the time limit for submission of this 64D used to be 30th November. To the principal commissioner, whoever is the jurisdictional principal commissioner, this form 64D is there now. Now that is made to 15th June.
So that the investors will receive the information before their due date for filing the return of income, and they will have adequate time to incorporate the entries into their return of income.
Correct. If you see the form also, it is also earlier there. It is very handy that they can straight away incorporate whether it is short term, long term. All these details can easily be incorporated in their returns.
Right.
The form is that much comprehensive enough to take care of all these details.
Yeah, the form runs into many pages.
Yes.
Right. Of course, all these things have to be filed digitally. Moving forward to the next notification dated 29th July 2020. Now, this amends the notification which was already given on 24th June 2020. The number was 35 of 2020. Now, this notification given on 29th July amends the already given notification number 35 2020. In that, the one of the due date of 31st July 2020 was extended to 30th day of September 2020. This is with regard to assessment year, what you call 1920, filing of belated returns or revised returns for assessment year 1920. First, due to COVID relaxations, the time was extended to 30th June. Later on, it was extended to 31st July, and now it is 30th September.
Correct.
Do you want to add something, sir?
Please, before 30th September, instead of waiting for a further date. Of course, because of the COVID also, it is getting difficult. But if whoever are the non-filers, they understand the consequences, the severe consequences of it. I think they will not resort to non-filing, and they will definitely take this as an opportunity to file it.
Yeah. Will you take up the point number 2?
Yes, sir. Let's go.
Yeah. Can you take up the point number 2?
Yes, sir. Definitely. This point number 2 is, no, sir. What it says is that it is actually applicable for assessment year 2021. This is concerned about the senior citizens. The senior citizens, whoever are not having any business income, any income from business or profession, they are not under the obligation to pay any advance tax. But if there is any self-assessment tax that is payable, what this second proviso, what it says is that if they can pay the self-assessment tax before 31st July 2020, it will be treated as an advance tax. Thereby, if any self-assessment tax is to be paid, which exceeds 1 lakh rupees after 31st July, such senior citizens are also under the obligation to pay interest under section 234A. Though they don't have any obligation to pay any advance tax, but if the self-assessment tax is going to, if it is more than 1 lakh rupees, they will be still under the obligation to pay 234A if they don't clear it off before 31st July.
Right. So moving forward with this notification dated 30th July 2020, which is also an agency which has been notified under section 138 of the Income Tax Act. Take it forward, sir.
Sir, it is the Competition Commission of India, which is also notified under 138(1), which is for which the department will be sharing the information as and when required.
Yeah, it appears that the month of July is a month of sharing. Because many of the agencies or authorities were notified for the purpose of sharing of information with the income tax department. So this month can be named as a month of sharing as far as these notifications are concerned. With that notification, we are done with the notifications and we are into the press releases which have been given in the second fortnight of July 2020. This press release was on 17th of July, which gives us the information with regard to the amount of refunds that have been made, which will be helpful in these COVID days. So many lakhs of cases of refunds have been settled, and also very considerable amount of refunds have been made. And also they want to clean up these refund related tax demands by 31st of August. And also the income tax, the CBDT wants to inform the SSCs that whenever the SSCs receives emails to their registered mail IDs, the income tax department wants you to respond to the mails immediately, because if there are any issues relating to your refunds wherein they find it difficult to refund the money to you, they may send you the information through emails, and you have to respond to those emails quickly, so that it will help you or assist you in getting the refunds quickly. Moving
Correct.
forward to the next press release, this is with relate to this e-campaign for voluntary compliance of income tax for assessment year for financial year 18-19, that is assessment year 19-20, from 20th July. Previously, the deadline for assessment year 2019-20 was scheduled at 31st July 2020. So what the department has thought is that it want to start a campaign for 10 days, for the last 10 days, so that SSCs will become aware, and they will comply with their return of income, be it belated or revised, for assessment year 19-20. But however, we already know that this deadline has been extended to 30th September 2020. So sooner than later, the department may start the campaign. Sir, are you aware of the campaign? Did you receive any of your clients received these messages? I don't think my clients got these messages.
No,
Did
sir.
they start the campaign?
No. Already, some of our clients got these kind of messages from the department. Generally, there is one e-campaign portal. If you see it is, complaints portal in that e-campaign portal. There, the information about high-value transactions. Say, if you have made investments on a larger count, or if there are certain purchases which are not reflected, or if there are any cash deposits that are made in the account that are not in proportionate with the return of income. Say you will be filing your return of income for 2,50,000 or 3 lakhs, but you will be making deposits for crores of rupees. Then the department is asking you, or is just sending an alert that the cash deposits that are made are not in consonance, or are not matching with the return of income that is filed. Sir, it's more like a sumoto. It is an opportunity to make good of any of your defaults, because the
Right.
department through its data analytics and all these things is able to throw so much of information. It is not that at the time of scrutiny, or at the time of saying that you have made these deposits, whether you please furnish the particulars, you furnish the sources of the making the cash deposits. It is not that now. It is department is throwing you the information. Boss, we have this information with us. You please rectify your return of income, or you please file a revised return. It is an opportunity. So me personally, after seeing these messages, what I felt is that we may also might have missed out, because say if there are 10 sale deeds, the client might have given only 4 or 5, and he might also have missed another 2 or 3. The reason, whatever it may be. So please make a watch. See all the related information. Please check the SFT transactions. Please check the foreign remittance transactions and information related to GST. And let us try to help in the national building.
Right. The next press release was on 18th of July 2020, and wherein this deals with form number 26 AS, and the CBDT informs the taxpayers that now the 26 AS is more comprehensive than what it was earlier. Now it is going to incorporate all the information which have been received from SFTs, Statement of Financial Transactions. Previously, the SFT was called as AIR information, Annual Information Return. Thereafter, it was changed, nomenclated as SFT, and through SFT, the various kinds of transactions, high value transactions, which have been entered into by the SSEs are being populated, and these information received is placed in the form number 26 AS, so that the SSEs will be able to review them and also incorporate those transactions in their return of incomes. So it's your turn, sir.
Sir, not only these financial transactions, whatever are the proceedings that are pending against an SSE in the department, what are the demands that are due? What are your investments in mutual funds, financial institutions, bonds? And your Form 26 is able to throw so much of information. It is not that the department is having that information. It is also for us to understand that the department is now able to collect as much as it can. Now the hands, we can now clearly understand that the department hands and eyes are so big to take care or to see whatever is made by us.
No, actually, until last year, all these information was not available in form number 26 AS.
Correct.
Now, there may be certain cases wherein the SSEs might have inadvertently missed certain information. Later on, in a scrutiny or later on through this what you call Operation Insight, if the SSE after filing his return of income at the time of processing under 143(1), when the information is matched with the SFT transaction, the return may be selected for scrutiny, and the SSE may be subjected to certain undue hardships of huge penalties, etc. So in order to avoid all these things, what they have done is they are giving the information to the SSE before he files his return of income itself. Now, making the SSE to file the return of income, thereafter match this information and select the case for scrutiny. Instead of doing that, what they are trying to do is, now itself they are presenting the information to the SSE, so that the SSE should be double cautious, and before filing the return, refer the 26 AS, ensure that all transactions reflected therein have been dealt with appropriately and adequately in the return of income, so that in future you will not be subjected to hardship on yourself. So
now everything is in front of you, sir. It is to the SSE to decide whether they are going to file a true and correct return of income.
yeah, this press release dated 20th July deals with the MOU between CBDT and Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises. Take it forward, sir.
This the purpose of this sharing is, no, sir. The purpose of sharing this information is the micro, small, and medium enterprises. These three categories. The categories are divided based on the investment and turnover. So earlier there used to be no cross check about what is filed with the income tax department and what is filed with the MSME authorities. Now through this sharing of information, there will be a cross check to decide the category of to decide the category under which an enterprise falls. So gone are those days where there used to be balance sheet, one balance sheet for ROC, one balance sheet for income tax department. Gone are those days. Now everything is available with everybody.
Right. The next MOU is between CBDT and CBIC.
For whatever information that is filed with the GST authorities, that will be available with the department, that will be available with the income tax department. Whatever is there with the income tax department, that will be available with the GST authorities. So you should be double careful at the time of reconciliation of turnover, and what are the items that are not shown as turnover in GST, why they are shown as turnover in the income tax department. You need to, if you take the purchase also, you need to be double careful in taking the purchase, because there will be cases in 2A where the purchase are not reflected by your seller, but you will be claiming it based on your invoices. So there will be some gap or some difference in both the returns. In the income tax return, you will be claiming high purchase. In the GST 2A, there will not be that much of purchase for whatever reason it may. So all these cases need to be addressed very carefully, because the information is available with both the authorities.
Yeah, it is not that previously there is no understanding and sharing of information. Much earlier to this MOU, there was another MOU, but now that MOU was superseded by this MOU, and also there was a change in the nomenclature. Previously, now it is called as a CBIC, and previously the board was erstwhile called as a Central Board of Excise and Customs. Now it is changed to Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. So, and also a steering group will be set up to monitor the continuous exchange of information between both these boards. And also, the 160th income tax day was celebrated on 24th of July 2020, and on that day, Honorable Finance Minister as well as Honorable Finance Minister for State, and also the Finance Secretary and also the Chairman CBDT have given their messages. With this, we concluded the circulars, notifications, and press releases. We are into the case laws of various forums. We will deal one by one. We'll be dealing with 12 case laws altogether in this edition of our update, one being from Honorable Supreme Court, and a few from the High Courts of Delhi, Madras, Bombay, and also certain case laws of the ITAT of Kolkata, Visakhapatnam, New Delhi, Bangalore, Chandigarh, and Mumbai benches. This case of Sri Chaudhary Transport Company, which was decided by Honorable Supreme Court, deals with an issue where 194C TDS is to be deducted for payments to subcontractors wherein there is no oral or written contract. Now, please take it forward, sir.
Sir, here the SSC is a firm. It had entered into a contract with Aditya Cement Limited. The contract is that they will be transporting the cement to various places in India, and it will be engaging trucks, or it will do the necessary infrastructure to see that the transportation, the cement is transported to various places. In this process, apart from their own trucks, they have hired the trucks from various operators or from various owners, and they have made payments to all these truck owners whose services are hired. They have not deducted any TDS on these things, and they have claimed whatever higher charges that they have paid, they have claimed it as expenditure. In the assessment, the assessing officer pointed out this deficiency about non-deduction of tax at source. The SSC firm said that we have not taken the services on a contract basis. Whoever is the transport operator that comes to our knowledge or comes to our picture will take the services. There is no written contract between us. Number two, in fact, we are just commission agents, because the majority amount, whatever we have received, that is passed on to the truck owners only. Whatever we have got is only a nominal commission that is retained with us. So it is not a case where we have taken these trucks on subcontract basis. In the assessment, the assessing officer observed that though there may not be any contract between the SSC firm and the truck owners or truck operators, he observed that the firm is directly getting payments from the Aditya Cement, and afterwards, whatever the payments that this firm has got, it is giving it to the truck owners. But one observation that is made by the assessing officer is that there is no relationship or there is no contract between the truck owners and the cement company. So he observed that it is not a case where you are a commission agent, but it is definitely a case where you have subcontracted the work of transportation of cement to these truck operators. But finally, you are only responsible for making the transportation of this cement. So, based on these observations, he disallowed under 40 AA whatever the payments that are made on which TDS is not deducted. He disallowed that sum in under 40 AA. This matter traveled to IT80. This matter traveled to IT80. High Court, Rajasthan High Court, and afterwards this case has come before the Supreme Court. Before the Supreme Court, the same arguments, whatever are there, whatever are placed, they are also placed before the Supreme Court, and they said that it is not a case where TDS is applicable because there is no contract in writing between us and between the firm and the truck operators. So when there is no contract in writing, there is no need for a deduction of tax at source under 194C. So, based on all these arguments and observations, what is said is that hiring of the services could be made either through a written contract or without any written contract, or without any written contract. It will hardly have any relevance because under any scenario, either you have a written contract or where there is no contract, any written contract, it won't make any difference because he is your subcontractor and you are under the obligation to deduct tax at source. And another point that is brought to the Supreme Court is also that, of course, it is brought to the notice of assessing officer also that it is also not practically possible for the SSC firm to deduct a tax because after all they are truck operators, they will immediately they will transport it and they will ask for some money, and whatever money is given they will take it away. It is very difficult to make tax deduction at source. Those arguments that the arguments that they cannot deduct tax at source, the impracticability or the impossibility to make tax deduction at source is also not upheld. Another point is that it is also observed that they have relied on one Delhi High Court judgment, SSC. In that Delhi High Court, in a scenario, they have said that the SSC is only a facilitator, is an intermediary, and they said that for him there is no obligation to deduct a tax at the source because he is acting only as a facilitator. That case name is Hardarshan Singh 358 or 427. SSC placed so much of reliance on that judgment. Supreme Court distinguished that judgment, saying that the facts of that case are not applicable to you. The reason for it is, in that case, he is only just a facilitator. He is only a mediator. He is only getting commission. The payment is directly, there is direct contract between the truck operators and the cement company in that case. But in this case, there is direct contract between you and the cement company, and there is no contract between operators and the cement company. And so it said that yours is the case where you are a subcontractor and 40A is applicable to you. And sir?
Yeah, please continue.
Right. Another argument that is placed before the Supreme Court is that just a minute. Another argument that is placed before the Supreme Court is that 40A IA is applicable only to the payments that are outstanding at the end of the year. So there is no need to make any TDS in respect of the payments that are already paid. So if any payment is outstanding as on 31st March, then only there is need to make TDS. Otherwise, there is no need to make any TDS. They try to rely upon the literal interpretation of Section 40A. That literal interpretation is also not upheld by the Supreme Court. And another request that is made by the SSC is that now from 2014, the tax, the 40A disallowance is now restricted or curtailed to 30% of the expenditure. What the SSC requested is that why can't it be made in retrospective application? The Supreme Court observed that such kind of making it into a retrospective application is not permitted because whatever is the law that is there, that is applicable for the relevant assessment year, that the law should be taken, the provision should be applied according to the statute that is there at that point of time, unless it is made in law or unless it is intended through a statute. It is once again a very good judgment that needs to be understood by everybody is that wherever party A is there, please make TDS because it's very difficult to come out of the clutches of RTA.
Right. In Savita Kapila case, the Delhi High Court has decided upon an issue wherein the notice and consequential proceedings were initiated in the name of the deceased, and the assessment order was passed in the name of the petitioner, who is the legal representative. So the proceedings are against one person, and the order was passed in the name of the legal representative. Now, what has the Honorable Delhi High Court has decided on this issue? Please take it forward, sir.
Sir, here Mohinder Pal Kapila, she is the one who had made, who is actually thought to be assessed by the Income Tax Department. She passed away in December 2018. The notice under Section 148 was issued on 31st March 2019. This notice actually was served to the last known address of her, but nobody is residing there. So the department approached the banker based on the KYC documents. They would get some phone number, and they have contacted the legal aids, and the proceedings, whatever are there, they are transferred in the name of the legal aid. Whoever is the legal heir, the name of the legal heir, of course, she is not only the one legal heir, she is one of the legal heirs. The legal heir actually uploaded one death certificate stating that the SSC on whom they thought of initiating the proceedings is no more. So they have uploaded one death certificate. And afterwards, the assessment is completed, and assessment was passed on 27/12/2019. And whatever the additions that they thought of making, they have made in the name of this legal aid. Against this assessment order and against this reopening of the assessment, SSC had filed one writ petition before the Honorable Delhi High Court. In the Delhi High Court, the revenue had placed so many arguments that they have first stated that they are not aware of the death of the SSC, and they also specifically pointed out that there is a different statutory authority, that is the registration of there is a separate statutory authority under the registration of Births and Deaths Act, which is entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining the register of births and deaths, and the revenue was not at all obliged or is not under the obligation to maintain a record because there will be as many as 44.5 crore bank holders in the country. Therefore, what they said is that there is no such obligation for the department to maintain such a record of these things. Against this, what the Delhi High Court observed is that similarly there is also what they have pointed out is that Equally, there is no statutory obligation on the legal representative also to intimate the factum of the death to the income tax department. So department cannot say that we have not received the information of death about the SSC. So that's why we have served the notice. It's a case where it clearly the Delhi High Court stated that there is no requirement in the statute, under the statute, that the death of any SSC is to be intimated to the department. Number two is the department, another argument placed before the Honorable High Court is that here the case, the assessment is made. It can be challenged through a process of law, that is before CAT appeals, before Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, then to High Court. So they have questioned about the maintainability of the writ petition. For that, the Delhi court observed that just because an alternative remedy is available, there is no need or that will not prevent the for filing a writ petition, because in this case, reopening itself is bad in law. Because this reopening itself is not sustainable under law. The reason that it is served on a person who is no more. So when a notice is served, notice itself is invalid and the proceedings cannot be continued forward. So when the notice and when the assumption of jurisdiction itself is wrong, there is nothing wrong in SSC or nothing wrong from the side of the SSC for filing a writ petition against this 148 notice and subsequent proceedings.
Right.
But see, another interesting observation is made is just because a death certificate is uploaded, it cannot be said that the SSC had participated in the proceedings of the Income Tax Department. Just because you have filed one death certificate, you cannot say that the SSC had participated in the proceedings. So now it cannot be challenged afterwards. So that scenario will not be there just because just a death certificate is only uploaded and it cannot be treated as participation in the proceedings. And with respect to applicability of section 159, also what they said is that 159 section is applicable in a case where the proceedings are initiated and pending against an SSC when he is alive. And after his death, the legal representative will come into the shoes of the SSC who is now no more. But here in this case, the very notice itself is served after the death of the SSC. So the provisions of section 159 are also held to be non-applicable. Sir, it's a very good judgment where in cases where SSCs are getting notices after the death if the legal representatives are getting the notice, definitely that can be questioned, because there are enough judgments on the same subject that the notice or assumption of jurisdiction itself is invalid.
Yes, the Delhi Honorable High Court of Madras dealt with an issue of claiming a deduction which was not claimed in the original return. They want to claim the deduction of interest by filing a rectification petition under section 154 in the case of Nagaraj & Co. Private Limited. Please go through the decision, sir.
Sir, here the company had made some fixed deposits. And after making these fixed deposits, it has closed it and it has got some interest. On the interest, the banker had rightly deducted tax at source, had deducted TDS. They have issued manual Form 16A also. But these sir?
Sir, Raghavendra Garu, this case is with relate to the claim of interest on loan, which was disallowed in the earlier year.
Right.
Because it is not paid. Now it is paid, and have to claim under section 43B.
Sorry, thank you. Since there are 2 to 3 Madras High Court decisions, I got a bit confused. Thank you. Right. Here now, sir, the SSC company had paid some interest on loan. It has not made that claim in its return of income. And afterwards, it had filed 154 petition stating that it had paid interest on loan and this interest is allowable under section 43B. The assessing officer rejected this 154 petition. What he said is that it is not a case because there is no mistake that is apparent on the record for making rectification under 154. This meant this case traveled to CIT appeals, ITAT. Now it is before Madras High Court. It is observed by the High Court that this claim of interest itself requires definitely verification of the interest statements, interest certificates that are given by the bank. It is not that it can straight away be allowed. So 154 is not a platform to make such claims, because whenever something, say, if an issue is debatable or if it requires further investigation, 154 definitely is not a platform to make such claims. What is stated is that it should be filed through a revised return of income. When it is not filed through revised return of income, 154 is not permitting such kind of claims which are not generating or which are not emanating out of mistake apparent from the record.
Yes, right. The next case is with regard to Gigabyte Technology India Limited. This issue was decided by Honorable High Court of Bombay, wherein this Gigabyte Technology India Limited, what it has done is it has some obsolete stock on hand. It did not sell this stock. It only had it in its hand. But what this Gigabyte Technology has done is it has claimed a deduction of loss on account of this obsolete stock. Now, how was it decided, sir?
It's something, it is also decided in favor of the SSC. What the court or even at the tribunal also observed is that the SSC argument is that they are having this motherboards, laptops, and all these things. Because of the fast technology environment in this electronic industry, though the product may be available now, it is obsolete after some point of time. So they have taken an accounting policy. They have taken like this. If it is for a period of more than 1 year, they are taking it obsolete 100%. If it is from a period of 180 days to 1 year, they are taking 50%. That is the policy that they are taking, that they are consistently following from years. And it is also brought to the notice that, say, if the closing stock is reduced, anyway, it is going to become the opening stock of the next year now. So there is no loss to the revenue also now. So whatever is the closing stock that is now, which is reduced, the opening stock, when it is, the same figure will be carried forward. So there also it will be reduced now. So there will not be any loss to the revenue. These are the few arguments that are placed before the authorities.
When it is actually sold, the price for which it is sold will be credited to the profit and loss account, and the debit side of the opening stock, which is at a lower amount. So if any profit has been arising on the sale of that, it will be accounted for in the next year in which it is sold.
It gets automatically reflected in the accounts in the year in which it is sold. If it is obsolete, since they are saying it is obsolete, they are unable to sell it. So if they make a sale, whatever are the sale proceeds, that they get created into the account. And moreover, it is very much inconsistent with 145A of section 145A of IT Act, wherein the stock has to be valued at cost or net realizable value, whichever is less. The High Court also observed that it is very much inconsistent with section 145A and accounting standards also, and it has upheld the claim that is made by the SSC.
Yeah.
Finally,
in this case, in respect of obsolete stock, the net realizable value will be lower than the cost. So the net realizable value of nil will be taken as the cost. That was the policy which has been adopted, and it is acceptable under section 145A. Is it like that?
Yes, sir. Yes, no. The cost or net realizable value, whichever is less, will be the closing stock.
Yes.
Because that is what is there in 145A. The SSC is also doing the same thing, when some stock, because of the technological advancements, when nobody is purchasing it, it will be valued at the net realizable value. So
Right.
when it is zero, automatically that loss gets affected in our profit and loss account. Whenever it is sold, if they can make any realization of it, the sale proceeds will be created into the P&L account. So there is no loss to the revenue, and it is very much inconsistent with 145A and accounting standards.
And also 37(1) is roped in, I think, in this section, in this law, in this case law.
Right. Because finally, it's not a wrong claim, sir. That much you can say.
Right. Moving forward, in the case of Subramania Siva, wherein the SSE was subjected to TDS on fixed deposits, it was not reflected in 26A EAS, but it was the banker has given him 16A. Assessing officer has disallowed the TDS credit, and the SSE went on an appeal. And so, please take it forward, sir.
Sir, this is, I think this is the case what I was discussing. Here now the SSE made certain fixed deposits. Interest is paid, and these fixed deposits, whenever these fixed deposits at the time of closing, they have deducted TDS also on the interest, whatever is payable to the SSE. They have issued Form 16A, annual Form 16A. Since these details are not uploaded, the issue arising here is about the allowability of the TDS credit. What the Honorable High Court decided is that it has asked the department to verify the application of the SSE along with the document, that is the give the
Sir, I think we have an issue with your yeah, please go on. Please go on, sir.
Right. Anyway, here it is a fact that the tax is deducted by the banker. It is also deposited with the government. The banker has issued Form 16A. The only thing that is the only mistake or the only fault with the banker is that they have not uploaded the details in an electronic form. But manual 16 Form 16A is given. So credit cannot be denied for the reason that these details are not uploaded to the department. That is the crux of the judgment.
Right, sir. The next one is with relate to Dhankamal Common Sales Private Limited, dealt by ITAT Kolkata, and this is in relation to an addition made under Section 68 for exchange of shares between two companies. One company gave shares to another company for acquiring shares of that other company. The assessing officer made an addition of under section 168 of the value of those shares, including the share premium. Take it forward, sir.
Correct. Here, the shares are issued. It is not for cash. The shares of some other company is the consideration that is received for the allotment of these shares. The assessing officer wanted to tax it under section 68. What is observed by the ITAT Kolkata in this case is that section 68 is not applicable in cases where there is no involvement of cash. It is only a case where, just like a barter system, where for the shares allotted, you have received shares. So 68 has no application. Here, sir, it needs to be mentioned that not only in this case, if there is one journal entry that is passed, whereby some account is created. Just because some account is created without any actual receipt of cash, you cannot make any addition under 68. That is already held by so many judicial forums. Just because an entry is found in the books of accounts without any actual receipt of money or without actual receipt of cash, 68 cannot be applied. That is the crux of the judgment.
Right, sir. This is in respect of D. Maramurali, which has been decided upon by ITAT Vishakhapatnam, wherein an addition is made under section 68 in respect of certain unexplained cash deposits in the bank account of the SSC. So how was it decided, sir?
Sir, here, sir, the SSC made certain cash deposits. He could not explain properly the sources of it. So the assessing officer made the addition of these cash deposits under section 68. They could not get a relief before CIT. Finally, the matter traveled to ITAT. There, they have filed one additional ground saying that 68 has no application in this case. What the SSC had relied upon is that 68 applies to a case where a credit is found in the books of accounts. Here, if we see, it is there are no books of accounts that are maintained by the SSC in this case. Number two, the passbook that is maintained with the banker will be having the details of the credits, debits, and whatever are the transactions that are done by the SSC or by the appellant. Banker's passbook can never be treated as the books of accounts of the SSC because it is the books of the banker. It is not your books. So based on that analogy, the ITAT upheld that 68 cannot be applied here because it is not a credit that is found in the books of accounts of the SSC. But they have made one interesting remark that this addition should have been made under section 69, but 68 cannot be applied here, and the whatever addition that is made under this count is held to be deleted.
Yes. Moving forward, the ITAT Delhi, in the case of Advocates Welfare Fund Trustees Committee, the registration under section 12AA and 80G were rejected for non-furnishing of financials. Take it forward, sir.
Right. Actually, they have made an application here for getting registration under 12A and 80G also. The CIT exemptions have called for their financials, their balance sheet, and income and expenditure account. Somehow they could not submit it. But it is a fact that it is an advocate welfare fund, which is meant for protecting the rights, and there is no dispute that the whatever activities they are doing or whatever the objects that are there in their deed, they are very much falling within the definition of section 215, which speaks about the general public utility, charitable purpose. Everything is defined in 215. There is no dispute about the trust deed or the object that they are not falling within the definition of 215. The only dispute is the 12A and 80G are denied for the reason that you have not filed the financials. What was held by the ITAT is that the CIT exemptions cannot deny registration just for the reason that the financials are not submitted. That can be very much taken care at the time of assessment once after 11 after granting registration under 12A, because whether it is genuine, whether the trust is genuine, or whether the objects are fitting into the definition of 215 can be seen from the objects clause. So the CIT exemption should confine to the should confine himself to the objects and give grant exemption under 12A. But here one small point here is that now in the Finance Act 2020, this loophole or this phenomenon is also taken care. At the time of granting final registration, no, the PIT is having the power to see the documents, to verify the genuineness. So now you cannot come to this case and say that you have no right to verify the book of accounts and then grant the exemption. That is very much taken care by the amendment in the Finance Act 2020.
Right. The ITIT Bangalore, in the case of Flutura Business Solutions Private Limited, has decided upon an issue wherein whether the assessing officer has the power to change the method of valuation for determination of fair market value of issue of shares.
Right. Here, no, the SSC was, there is some allotment of shares. At the time of allotment of shares, the fair market value can be ascertained by two methods. One is net annual method, NAV. The other one is discounted cash flow method, net asset value, sorry. It is for the SSC to take that option. SSC can go with the NAV method or can go with the discounted cash flow method. But there is definitely, you need to substantiate that the valuation is made properly. Here in this case, the SSC had gone with the discounted cash flow method. During the course of assessment proceedings, it is observed by the assessing officer that the parameters that are considered in the discounted cash flow method are not to the satisfaction of the assessing officer. One is weighted average cost of capital. According to that is not right. The growth rate is considered, whatever is taken is wrong or is not correct. The projections, whatever are given, they are not matching with the actuals. Likewise, you could find some anomalies in the valuation certificates and the parameters that are taken in the discounted cash. So he finally had substituted, or he had gone with the net asset value method, and he had decided the fair market value of the shares in a different manner. The SSC is before the ITIT. In this law, the ITIT said that, or observed that, the assessing officer is not having the power. He cannot substitute altogether a new method. At best, what he can make is that if there are any deficiencies in the valuation that is adopted, either in the parameters or anything, he can definitely get a fresh valuation done as per the right parameters. But he cannot under the same method. But he cannot change the method. That is the crux of the judgment.
Right. Now, in Vijay Kumar Vanchu, ITIT Delhi has decided upon an issue wherein an SSC has sold 2 residential units separately, and thereafter he has purchased one single residential house and claimed under exemption under section 54. Whether this was tenable or not, how it was decided.
Right. Here now, sir, the office is sold 2 houses. But what he has done is, whatever are the sale proceeds from the 2 houses, he had invested in 1 house. But the assessing officer is not happy with this. According to the assessing officer, there should be 1 for 1. Means for the first house we have sold, we should purchase 1 house. For the second house we have sold, we should purchase another house. Since we have purchased only 1 house for both the sales, he disallowed the claim under section 54, and he has restricted the exemption under section 54 only to 1 house sold. What is placed before the ITIT is that there is no such provision in the entire section 54 that you should purchase 1 house. You should purchase 1 house for every sale. There is no such restriction that that you cannot invest all the proceeds in 1 house. When there is no such express restriction, these kind of interpretations are said to be not correct, and the claim of the SSC is upheld by the ITIT.
Yeah. In the Paramount Impex case, the SSE did not maintain the stock register, and the assessing officer rejected the books of the accounts on the ground that stock register is not maintained. Sir, how did the ITAT Chandigarh bench decided upon this issue?
Here, the books of accounts are rejected. The reasons cited for rejection of books of accounts is that number two, the method of valuation of the stock that is made by the SSA, the department is not happy with it. The reason for it is the SSA is making a count of all the physical inventory on the closing date, and based on the past experience, he is applying the SSA is applying GP rate, and he is arriving at the closing stock valuation based on the GP rate. So the department felt that it is not a correct method because applying the GP rate for making valuation of stock is nowhere prescribed. That is number one. Number two, since the stock register is also not maintained, they felt that it is a fit case for making rejection of books. The ITAT observed that just because stock register is not maintained, it is not a case, it is not a fit case for making rejection of books of accounts. What is observed is that the department could not find any defect either in the sales, purchases, or in any other documents that are submitted before the department. When everything is all right, just for the reason that the SSA could not maintain a stock register, and it SSA also submitted one small point that there are small items for which it is almost impracticable for maintaining a stock register. All these arguments are upheld, and what the ITAT held is that if they are not happy with the valuation of the stock, somehow it should be done properly. Can't be the books of accounts only for the reason that stock register is not maintained. Yes, sir.
Right. The next case is of Confederation of Indian Textile Industry, wherein the claim of exemption under Section 11 was denied, and the case went up to ITAT Mumbai.
Here, no, this association, no, as the name itself says, no, it is Confederation of Indian Textiles. It is meant for protecting the interests of the industry who are in this clothing industry and all these things. The assessing officer felt that this association is meant for the members. So, though the SSA are not claimed any concept of any exemption under principle of mutuality, the assessing officer has gone a little bit forward and he had applied the principles of mutuality, and he had separated some income that is received from members. With respect to some interest on fixed deposits and some other miscellaneous income, he had denied the exemption under 11 and awarded that income to tax. What the ITAT observed is that though it is meant for the members, it is not that even a section of the public is also covered under the definition of public at large, though it is meant for public or for a particular industry. And when the objects are very much fitted into 250, Section 11, the exemption under Section 11 cannot be denied because it is meant for the members. So generally, it happens with so many trade associations.
Right. So with that, we have come to the end of those significant case laws which thought of dealing in this episode or edition of our update. Now, for now, both of us will take leave from you, and we will meet you in next edition of the update.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.